A show that tackles the big issues affecting the BVI and the rest of the Caribbean. Searches for answers to today's big questions and gives viewers a unique perspective on developing stories. Follow the big story with me, Kathy Richards, only on JTV. This is the big story. I'm Kathy Richards. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this edition. Today, I have as the guest, he is the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Environment, Natural Resources, and the Climate Change. I had to look at my phone for that one because it's so new and still trying to get accustomed to it. Mr. Ronald Smith Berkeley. Welcome to the big story. It's been quite a long time.
It's been, yes.
Yes.
It's good to be here, but it's been quite a long time.
It's
for real.
quite a long time.
Yes.
So how has things been with you in this space?
It's going well, you know. I previously served in this ministry back, I guess, 5-6 years ago. Then I was transferred to the Ministry of Communications and Works. And then earlier this year came back to this ministry. Mm-hmm. So it's familiar grounds, if you will, familiar staff. So some of the items that we had started back then, you know, it's really just a matter of picking these back up and moving them forward, along with some new ones, mm-hmm. like the one that we'll talk about today, but,
yes.
but not so new, in that, you know, we have been talking about how to organize ourselves, if you will, when it comes to the distribution or disposal of Crown land. It is now coming together in a more formal type arrangement.
Why we need to do that?
Well, you need to do that in order to maintain transparency, to maintain accountability, to ensure that the land that we do have, land is limited in the BVI, just generally speaking, but just to ensure that the land that we have is properly used, basically meaning land that would be used, land that would be needed for Crown use, for developing schools, hospitals, putting road infrastructure and all that. So I think initially the idea is to ensure that lands are available for those kind of use, and then obviously land would be made available to homeowners, person in the agricultural industry, even person in the commercial industry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this tightening of the structure, or even making it, you know, even more government friendly, user friendly, has that been sparked by a growing need for land?
Yes, I think on any given day, we will have more need or more requests for land than land that are available. You know, but it's how do you ensure that the persons who really need the land, mm-hmm. You know, as prices continue to skyrocket in the territory, just all over the place, there are persons who may be unable to purchase their own land. So government has decided to ensure that these persons are given the opportunity in order to acquire land.
Okay, so this is something that is part of these policies that we have.
Oh yes, definitely. The policy that we actually working on speaks to a number of issues. It speaks to just in very general terms, mm-hmm. the layout of the policy. You know, I encourage everybody to pick it up and read. It's only 17 pages long. Mm-hmm. We define some terms in there so that persons understand what Crown land is. You know, generally speaking, that's land that's owned by all of us, managed by the government on behalf of all of us. We've also went into some guiding and principles. I think an interesting point or an interesting aspect of the document that I think people would find quite interesting is the contextual and especially the historical context within which we place the policy. Then we get into some old and some new areas of land management and the disposal, how the land is being disposed, and in terms of an application, previously, persons would just send in a letter stating that I would like land in the North Sound or Virgin Gorda or the Valley or whatever else. Not necessarily zeroing in on where this land might be available. They just want some land.
Okay.
So what comes out of this process now, what comes out of this project, is really a land bank, if you will, that catalog all of the land that's available, where it is available. In that land bank will also have information in terms of who received land, at what price they paid for the land, complete transparency when it comes to the disposal of
So that
Crown
process
land.
is already in place,
That-
or
that-
it's being put in place?
That is being put in place.
Okay.
That process is being, this whole concept of the land bank goes way back, I'm sure more than a decade. Fortunately or unfortunately, the whole COIR environment, post-COI environment, has started pushing that along maybe a little bit more quickly than it maybe would have, in all honesty. But it has always been something that we wanted to do. What will come out of this eventually is we will move from the policy framework to some sort of legislation,
Okay.
so that we have the disposal of the Crown land enshrined in some piece of legislation that anybody can pick up and say, okay, this is the process, this is how it's done, and there's it takes the guesswork out of it, and it gives everybody who's qualified a fair chance at getting.
So
some
what am I
land.
gathering from that? As it exists right now, there is not a legislation that guides land.
Not in the disposal of the land.
Not disposal.
Not disposal. Not in the disposal of the land. There's no legislation around that. Even though we do operate, with some structure, quite frankly, in terms of the application, the vetting process. It goes through cabinet for final approval. All of that remains, but we tighten that up a little bit more in terms of bringing other steps into that process. And a critical step into that process is the authority, the Crown Lands Authority. So that now becomes, once the ministry does all the heavy lifting, all of the groundwork, if you will, everything is fed through the authority that goes through its own vetting process. And then after it's vetted there, that information now goes to cabinet for final decision making. And a part of what we have in the draft policy is that if there's an issue with anything that would have gone to cabinet, something isn't clear, whatever, then it comes back so that
To the ministry
to the ministry / authority, so that those points can be clarified and give cabinet information that is required in order to make a decent decision on what is being asked.
So to understand, why it is so important for us to go the route of trying to get this legislated, what were some of the challenges you were facing with the absence of legislation
But there wasn't challenges per se that requires that. It just seemed like the right thing to do.
Okay.
Because we're working on a number of other policies that, for example, the non-belonger landholding license policy, which, again, while there's legislation around that, the policy that we've now working on simultaneously with this one, the idea is that we would take it the distance, if you will, and have that enshrined in legislation as well. It just seemed like the right thing to do, because I think when you're working from just a policy framework, it tends to get, over time, maybe a little bit watered down, and everybody kind of maybe have their own interpretation of
And
what.
that's what I was trying to pull at. It could be a little more difficult, especially if you come into the courts of law to challenge something without without a legislation
behind
yeah.
it. Yes, yes. So having a main piece of legislation followed by the regulations, which somehow clarify all of the nice words that the lawyers tend to write. The
interpretation.
Exactly. That just seemed like the right thing to do, so that going forward, we have something to look to and say, okay, this is the process of how Crown land is disposed.
Okay, you alluded to earlier that one aspect that will be quite interesting to a number of people is that of the historical. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay, the historical, Kathy, I think people are going to find it quite interesting. In the early 1700s, well, I guess throughout the whole period of the 1700s, when the islands were inhabited by the planters, with having persons working the cane fields and what have you. At some point, all of that ended, and the economy at that time wasn't doing well. So in 1831, the government bought 110 acres of land in the up here by Cedar School, in the Kingston area that were given to what is referred to as the liberated Africans. It appears as though as these persons were on their way here to be enslaved, slavery was abolished. So the ship was intercepted. So these persons were never ever enslaved. They were given, the land was purchased to put them on, and ultimately they were given the land. And then in 1859, there was a land tax ordinance which allowed the government to seize and auction land in default of taxes.
Oh.
Right, yeah. So government seized these lands in default of taxes. So the
it was a lot.
A lot. So the auction ran from 10 to 3, and anything that wasn't sold between that time frame automatically went to the crown. Well, not back to government, because the government did not necessarily own it, because it was the plantation owner who owned it. They couldn't pay the taxes, so government obviously auctioned it off just to get the taxes. Two things short: death and taxes. Somebody did say that, right? So they couldn't pay the taxes. The land was auctioned off. All of the land that wasn't auctioned off went to the crown. Right. So that was the genesis, if you will, of crown lands, so to speak. And then in 1864, that was in 1859, and in 1864, 92 acres of land were bought in the McNamara area.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, in the McNamara area. Yeah, and history, I guess, based on history, that is when I guess the term crown land, it started appearing. Exactly. And then from there, we went to, in 1901, where it was in the Botanic Station area. Some land was purchased there. I don't know if anybody would remember when the agricultural station was actually in that area.
Okay,
yes.
First time hearing of that.
Yeah, I was actually in that area. And then in 1961, it moved to Paraquita Bay.
Oh, and I always wondered the history of Crown land, Paraquita Bay.
Yes, so it was moved to Paraquita Bay, and all of that land was made available for home ownership. And then in 1971, well, if we go back a little bit to 1778, there are 83 acres of land in the Nottingham area
down the east.
Down in East End, Longlook area. That was actually given to the former slaves.
Okay.
Right, 83 acres. And in 1971, it was vested in the crown so that the crown could give them title to the land. Right?
Okay.
Yes, and then obviously in 1971, we have the whole Wicomski saga.
Okay, that would have been
and,
like 52 years
yeah,
ago, right, somewhere.
that was like in the 1970s, 71. It was 70 acres of land. And then, obviously, in 1988, I'm sure you would have heard of the Renwick report.
Yes, the Renwick
from
report for
Anegada.
Anegada.
For Anegada.
That's always a big conversation. 'Cause I meant
yeah.
to take you there at some point.
Yeah, no, that's always a big conversation. And then in more recent times, like in 1993, 98, government started the first-time homeowners program, where they would buy these large tracts of land, divvy it up into lots, and then gave those land out to first-time homeowners. So, in order to qualify, you can't have 5 acres and get some government land. No, that wouldn't be right. Yes. You know what I mean? So it has to be persons who don't have land, do not have access to land, and these lands were in the Greenland area, the Nibs estate, and the more recent one, which was 2003, the Nibs, the Spooners estate that were purchased in 2003. So that is how, just in a nutshell, how this whole idea of crown land, the genesis of it, and where we are today, where government is actively purchasing land in order to assist first-time homeowners.
We referenced a whole lot about of that space on Tortola. Was it similar for Virgin Gorda, Anegada, and Jas Van Dyke?
Yes, Virgin Gorda, Anegada, Jas Van Dyke, all over the place. On Virgin Gorda, we have the Bond, the Great Hill, the Copper Mine area. In Jas Van Dyke, you have a place called Brown Gut and other areas. You have half of Little Jas Van Dyke is still Crown land. Yeah, a lot of the islands coming out of the whole plantation era basically went to the Crown because persons default on their taxes, right? And then obviously with the advent, I could say, of tourism industry back in the 60s, I think, is when we had our first hotel, Little Dick's, on Virgin Gorda. A lot of the smaller islands were leased out for that purpose, to build tourism in the territory. Yeah, so as it is right now, it is estimated possibly about maybe 33 or so % of all the available lands in the territory is Crown. Which is not a lot of land, but yeah, that's what it is now.
And I just was in a community meeting recently, and that's one of the things that came up, where people are interested in acquiring lands for farming, for housing, and to think that we have just about 33% of the land on the territory as Crown land. How tight this policy works toward making sure fair distribution.
Yeah. Well, the tightness of the policy really speaks to your income level. I mean, if you somebody that makes like 250, 300,000 a year, well, you might not qualify. You know what I mean? As opposed to someone who is maybe between 50 or 60,000, because I don't have any hard facts on this, but I think most people would agree with this statement. While most persons, let's say, coming right out of university, get a pretty decent job, might be able to pay a mortgage. Just the initial financial investment to get a house could be quite hefty, because most of the persons who have already received Crown lands, it's about 50% of what it would be on the open market. So it's a significant discount for persons who would have already received Crown land. Persons on places like Anegada, all they pay is the statutory fees, like the survey fees and what have you. I think in total it probably amounts to about $700 overall that they would pay. But that That's in a different
You,
category.
you realize I tried
That-
to,
yeah, I know.
to restrain from going
Yeah,
there.
I know, and maybe this is not. That probably requires its own
A whole
the
discussion. Yeah, it's a different
yeah,
forum.
the own discussion. But
Separate
that
big
is
story.
yeah, it's separate big story because that is really indeed a big story. It look, I think. I think people, I mean, even our constitution speaks to what land means. And let me turn to it very quickly here.
Go right ahead.
What land means to the average people. Let me quote from the Constitution. The people of the Virgin Islands have a free and independent spirit and have developed themselves and their country based on qualities of honesty, integrity, mutual respect, self-reliance, and the ownership of land. You know, and the ownership of land. So it, you know, and I think I could say without fear of contradiction that the land situation, if you will, in the Virgin Islands is unlike anywhere else. It's really unlike anywhere else.
Unique?
They're very unique.
Compared, it would have been compared to other, especially Caribbean countries.
Well, I mean, if you, the thing is, the unintended result of I guess auctioning off the land is that locals bought it. You know, locals went ahead and pooled their resources because right across the territory there are a lot of large tracts of land, but it's family land, right? You know, like the Berkeley family, or not, well, the Berkeley family ain't got none, but like the Berkeley family, right? At least I call a name that I shouldn't. Like the Berkeley would have these large tracts of land that back when this land was being auctioned off, they pooled their resources and bought the land. I would pick St. Kitts or any other island in the OECS or even in the wider CARICOM. Most of the land is still vested in the crown. It's still in the crown.
Yes.
You know, so it is almost the reverse here. In some instances where we have land, like in the Nottingham area, that was literally given to the slave, persons, I guess, had enough economic substance, I guess,
couple of herds of cows.
you know what I'm saying, to
stuff.
go ahead and when these lands was being auctioned off so that the government could get their taxes about the lands.
Okay.
You know.
So if we to come to that area now, we talk a lot about what the policy could look like, but going deeper into that, it talks about distribution a lot. Does it address in any way maintaining the ownership when government would have distributed or allotted plots of land to an individual? You see the 33% we have, and you distribute it. Does it address that individual when it would have been sold or given to you, maintaining the ownership?
Yes and no. For example, land, let's maybe deal in categories. The lands for commercial purposes will only be a leasehold, would not be sold, just leasehold. So it's still the Crown still maintain ownership. Agricultural purposes, that is a little different, but still very much Crown. Now, when it comes to the home ownership, that land is actually sold. But there's some restrictions, there's some covenants.
Those.
Around that. For example, again, just to touch on Anegada for the example,
that's okay.
is that you need to hold it for about 7 years.
7 years?
Yes,
7 years is no time.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. You need to hold it for about 7 years. And in other areas where things are a bit more flexible, when, for example, if government were to go out now and purchase another tract of land and then split, divvy that up, those covenants, I guess, will be specific to that, right? It may be in terms of how long the persons need to hold on to the land before they can sell it. And in the current policy that we're looking at is whether or not, because you don't want a situation where people are benefiting financially off of the rest of us, so to speak. you know, okay, you're at a place where you may not be able to afford land on the open market. So you now have some crown land, right? So it would make sense that, let's say maybe at some point you decide, well, you didn't want to develop this land anymore, or whatever the case might be, that maybe it goes to somebody else who, like, in need, as opposed to now you taking that land and selling it on the open market at fair market value and profiting handsomely. That wouldn't be a right thing to do. So we want people to go to the document, make your comments. Don't beat up on us too badly, because this is just a draft. You know, this is not the...
Yeah, because we were going to come to the public consultation part of it.
Yeah. This is not the laws of the Medes and the Persians here. This is just a draft. So make your comments. Our good friends at GIS,
they're flooding you with it.
Oh yeah,
They are flooding us with it.
So they have created a QR code. Mrs. McKelly, Bertha McKelly, and her team, and so I tried it. So it works. So this will be in public spaces. So you scan the QR code, and it takes you directly takes you directly to this document here, and make your comments. I mean, now, just to manage expectations a little bit, if you make a comment and you don't see it in here, you know, don't get twisted out of shape over that, because all of the comments need to be taken in context of the document, and you can't have a document that's incoherent, right? So we will sift through, and ultimately what goes forward, but you will never know if some eureka moment that you have that we didn't have ourselves, and it makes it in here if you don't comment.
Yes, okay. But I can clearly hear persons listening to this now dwelling on the point which you just spoke of, and that is government sells you this land, and it is coined in such a way that if for whatever reason you can't make it to develop it, to build or whatever, to return it. The argument I hear is, you sell it to me, I pay my money, don't care how little bit you sold it to me for, it's mine. Mine to do what I choose to. If I choose to sell it to El Negro, El Tegro, El Naco, it's my decision. Why would you want to determine for me who I should give it to or not?
No, that's an excellent point, and I'm sure that we'll get some of those comments. Firstly, that is not ultimately what will happen. That's just a thought that's floating out there. That's just a thought. Some persons might agree with it, some persons might not agree with it.
Yeah.
But when you think about the reasons why government is doing this, my personal view has nothing to do with the government. My personal view, it would morally, I would have a problem with persons knowingly would come in, buy a piece of crown land, sit on it, basically speculate, sit on it for a little while, get beyond the covenants and all of that, and then sell it at market rate. That was something just morally wrong with that, to me.
And you know that was third debate.
Of course it will.
So we need to have the debates,
yes.
Right? So let's talk a little about the plan, if there is one, or if it's already in train, public consultation. I know you talk about scanning the QR code and going through the document, but for quite a number of people, a face-to-face interaction is what is considered the ideal consultation. Yes,
a face-to-face, I guess when most people think about public consultation, that's what they think about. But in this era of technology, I mean, your phone is smart, mine is smart because it did get onto the document here.
Yes.
So, instead of, and you could do this on demand at your own convenience, while there are some persons, a few, I'm gambling here that the majority of persons would really want to sit and digest. You can't necessarily digest this in a 2-hour in my view,
17 pages.
you know,
Yeah.
you really can. And this is important. So while I'm not saying that we're not going to have face-to-face, we're driving people to the website, www.gov.vg. It will also be on Facebook. And this particular flyer will be just about everywhere. And hopefully persons will take advantage of the electronic space and sit in the comfort of their home, maybe have their own debate amongst themselves, and send in your comments, and we will see. This will be out for about 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay.
You know, which I think is only 17 pages long, you know, 3 to 4 weeks. It's a very easy read. I think a lot of the information is not new. It's not new at all. It's what we do. So instead of just sending in a letter, we're asking you to send an application form because we need information, right? We need information on who's getting the land. And instead of, let's say, the ministry going directly to cabinet, that is now going through the Crown Land Authority. So basically, it's tightening of the process. It's not entirely new. So as persons pick this up, they'll be familiar with a lot of what's here. What is also new is that instead of persons just writing in for, you know, okay, do you have Crown? I received a letter like this sometime last week. You know, I need some Crown land. It could be in the North Sound. It could be in the Valley. It could be like wherever. You will know now. Okay, well, don't ask for North Sound because there isn't anything available there yet. Or don't ask for the Valley, or don't ask for Yusmandai. And I think that's what people will find new and refreshing, so that you're more targeted in your ask and not just asking or miss, you know, kind of
and
thing.
that was one of the questions that came up at that meeting. I was just at a community meeting. Where do we have Crown land on Tortola? Where, you know, and the answer could not have been forthcoming in a very in a very definitive way. It was suggested that I think this is where it was said to be, but I'm thinking that with a policy like this now, like you said, would be very definitive to give you that. So you could have it here today, and next year you could have more someplace else, as you would have alluded to.
Oh, yes.
Would there be a process of updating that information?
Oh, yes. The information, the land bank will be regularly updated. The register will be regularly updated. We've also proposing a land use policy. So town planning, the ministry, and other stakeholders within government will develop a land use policy for government. That is, you know, government, there's always a need to build something for all of us, really, for public good. So that will be put in place, and that will be updated like every 5 years or so, as you know, as government needs change over the years. And as well as, like I said, the land bank, as government acquire more land, then it goes on there. But for the land use plan, that would be sort of incremental, maybe every 5, every 6 years, whatever. But for the land bank and for the register, that updates as it happens, almost like in real time. John Brown comes in and he gets a grant of Crown land. We update the register to say that John Brown received this land, how much he paid for the land, where the land is, so that everybody knows. You know, everybody is. I mean, that you could have that information now, but it's not easily accessible. Yeah. So yeah. To answer directly your question, is that update will come as it happens. Really.
Okay.
Yeah.
In a timely manner.
In a timely, yes.
Yeah. While some people know, there are those people who are not necessarily very clear on this aspect. Who qualifies to apply for land in the Virgin Islands?
We basically going with a Virgin Islander. The definition as per the Constitution. No, that is what is proposed. That is what is proposed in the policy. But I know we'll get a number of
Debates on
comments,
that.
right?
Yes, and comments.
Comments on that, and please, I want to stress the point. It is only a draft. That's all it is. So I'm saying that because I don't want persons to sort of get annoyed and unnecessarily so. It's just a draft. Propose. Let's debate. Let's whatever, and then ultimately what goes to cabinet. Everybody goes to cabinet for approval. Everybody would be pleased with it, but this is just a draft. This is just a
that brings us back to that public consultation face to face.
Face to face.
When you sit to have to jot in a comment on online system, it's different for some people not being able to effectively articulate themselves in writing, but they can do an awesome job if they're to speak to you in a public forum. You now having your team there taking that information that will be able to input it into that comment area in the way that person would not have been to. So are we still not going to be open to
I'm very much open to it, and I think you made quite an excellent point, because there are some persons who are not technically savvy like you are, and might want to come into an open forum like that, and we will consider it.
Yeah, consider it strongly.
Very strongly, very strongly, Miss Kathy. Very strongly.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else that is a key need to know about this draft?
In terms of what's in here, I think I would probably mention
all of it.
There isn't anything that some people find some of it interesting. I think some of the areas that we try to focus on is the sustainability, affordability, stability of lands for development. And so maybe if I just for a minute or two speak a little bit on that. Across the territory, because of the topography, it is prone to landslides and stuff like that. Yeah, and so it's not everywhere that's buildable, if I could use that term. So what we will do definitely for all Crown land, private land is a different story, but for all Crown land, before it is given out, we'll have that assessment done to ensure that you could build on the land. We've had not many, but we've had cases where persons just couldn't use the land. As a matter of fact, there's a live situation now that I'm dealing with, and we need to find another spot. But that's just the nature of the beast.
But in mapping, all right, so we know we have 33 acres of land, and we know that we will come up upon, there are areas on that 33 acres.
Wait, at 30%. 33%.
Yeah, sorry. Yes,
that's
correction.
Right.
Yeah. Of that 33% of the land in the territory. And we know that there are locations that may very well be not suitable for construction. In the interest of saving time and saving heartache and worries, could there be a system implied where you be able to effectively, before even allotting it to anyone, map out and say, okay, we cannot? Yes,
that's the intent. That's the intent. And that particular mapping out, if you will be done. Will be done in collaboration with the DDM.
Okay.
That deals.
That falls under DDM.
Yes.
Okay.
Not the mapping, but the vulnerability aspect of it, to make sure that the land is buildable and it's not prone to.
So is that like an interdepartmental collaboration that has to take, I guess, surveying,
land registry, DDM, town planning, and my ministry, all coming together to make sure that when John Brown gets his grant or his award of Crown land, that he could actually use the land.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said that this document, you're hoping to have it wrapped up within 7 weeks?
4.
4 weeks. And how soon do you think that this policy can be passed? When it's finalized and go to cabinet, go through all the ramifications, how soon you think that this can be now put in place to say we have this policy legislation?
Well, somewhere in around 5-6 weeks.
Yeah?
Yeah, because once we go through the consultation, whether online or we may consider some meetings face to face across the territory. Once that is done, then it goes to cabinet, and once cabinet once cabinet is okay with the policy and approves the policy, then we put it right into full force, and then AG will start working on the draft legislation. But all then we could be using the policy.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah,
Well, I think we covered the grounds
Yes,
there.
yes,
A
ma'am.
really interesting conversation. Honestly, to tell you, I wasn't so sure, well, this be interesting to hear about. Yeah, great stuff.
Yes.
Great stuff. I'm looking forward to hearing announcements of a public consultation where we sit face to face. Putting him on the spot. I'm
Yes,
going to put him on the spot for you.
I know.
Yes,
I know. Right.
We will continue to do our part here as a television outlet to share the information as much as we possibly can and to help in this process. And, anything that lends to the further development of a country in which you reside, where you live, where your navel string is buried, all of the categories you want to put it in, is important for us to do. And I love the avenue where persons can contribute and to show that this is not being done in isolation of policy makers and legislators, but the people who are targeted to benefit are integrally involved in the process.
Right. And just very quickly, even because I think most people who sort of stay in tune with House proceedings would know that when the bill goes to the House, there's a period of debate.
Yes.
So it's not over until I guess the governor assents to it and sign off and said, okay, this is so that even though we have a policy that's working with, there'll still be room for improvement, if you will, or changes or whatever until it's finally passed into legislation.
Okay, awesome. Mr. Smith-Berkeley, this has been a pleasure.
Yeah,
Interesting discussion. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of The Big Story. I'm Kathy Richards.